The COP itself provides another opportunity for African states to discuss topical issues that impacts them from a climate perspective. Critical for this COP is the extension of the conversations that started last year on the Loss and Damage Fund. And this panel specifically spoke to what are the requirements to successfully operationalize this fund for the benefit of the African continent. As a financial institution, a multilateral development bank that is committed to the development of Africa, we feel that the Loss and Damage Fund, although coming a little bit late, it's an opportunity for African states to address the clear and existential challenges that relate to the physical manifestation of the hazards of climate change across the continent of Africa. The fund is supposed to provide the requisite resources to support vulnerable states, the vulnerable people in Africa that are impacted by climate change. And as a Flexing Bank and an institution that is committed to the well-being and welfare as well as the development of the continent, we see this as an opportunity for the continent, and within our mandate, try as much as possible to support member states to get and take full advantage of the fund itself. We know that the fund is still at early stage. As of today at the COP, over $600 million has been pledged to support the fund, and we expect more to come on board in terms of capitalization of the fund. From an Flexing Bank perspective, based on our mandate, we have instruments to support member countries, particularly addressing issues that relates to that militate against effective access to the fund in terms of preparation of projects, advisory support to member states and African countries, African private sector in structuring products, structuring initiatives that better position them to meet the criteria that has been set out to benefit for them to benefit from the fund. In this regard, we currently have existing instruments of intervention. For instance, we have the Project Preparation Facility, which is intended to provide early stage project preparatory support for climate adaptation related interventions to boost Africa's resilience to climate change. We feel instruments of this nature would come in handy in helping African states prepare projects, early stage preparation of projects to meet the eligibility criteria of the fund itself. In addition to that, we also have risk guarantee instruments to support African countries in terms of providing that risk sharing framework for them to assess some of the key financial requirements of the fund. I know member countries will also need support in preparing their national structures of financial mechanisms to tap into the fund, and private sector to contribute to that fund, and a Flexing Bank would come in handy as a partner, a trusted partner in Africa's development to support our stakeholders and member states in taking advantage of the Loss and Damage Fund. In terms of access, governance of the fund and access to the fund, the board of the fund is structured to have membership from across the continent, across the globe itself, in terms of every continental representation at the fund. The idea for that is to ensure there is full representation in the fund, and the fund itself, in terms of structure, is intended to bring all stakeholders on board. National governments, countries have been asked to set up focal points comprising national governments, national institutions, private sector, civil society organizations, and even other stakeholders to come on board to contribute to the requirement setting and what it takes to operationalize the fund itself in terms of ensuring that there is access to the fund across every spectrum of the African continent, particularly the vulnerable aspects of the continent. Then lastly, where we come in as a Flexing Bank, we're a trusted partner of African governments and states. We are open to collaborate with our governments in the continent, member countries, even Africa's private sector, to ensure that they have what it takes to access the fund. And in terms of transparency, you talked about governance. The fund itself has put in place clear-cut disclosure requirements. In terms of oversight, the fund will be under the guidance of the COP Secretariat, as the case may be. So we see it as a good opportunity for Africa, to the extent that Africa is one of the most vulnerable spots in terms of the impact of climate change.